Hi, everyone. I am Dylan Dyer. I work here at Pendo as a field marketing manager, and I am happy to get started with the Pendorama for June. Thank you all for being here. We are going to get started.
Today.
Great. We had a great meeting with Ben.
If
Oh,
you
well.
if you're not muted, please make sure to mute yourself at this time. Just as a reminder, we are recording and we will send this out afterwards. The chat is open. Feel free to ask any questions and I will help moderate after the presenters get done, finish their presentations. And then I will help moderate the chat if you have any questions that come in during it. At this time, please feel free to get comfy and enjoy. I'm going to pass it off first to Derek, our senior product manager here at Pendo, and then followed by Derek will be Julie and Jesse from Direct Supply. Derek, I am going to stop sharing my screen so you can share yours, and I will let you take the floor.
All right, beautiful. Let me just share my screen here and we can get rolling. Hopefully everybody can hear me all right. I am sharing my screen now. All right. Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Derek Duoba. I'm product manager here at Pendo. Work on the analytics side of the house. Specifically, been doing most of my work in PES and then also in our Data Explorer product. Today, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some new functionality that we released around product engagement score, which is the PES API. So first, before I get into the details of PES API, I want to talk about kind of some background behind product engagement score. So when we were thinking about developing the product engagement score, we started thinking about like what companies use today in order to understand how well or whether or not their users like their product. And the one thing that kind of came to mind was really that NPS. Everybody uses NPS. Most people really like NPS. It provides a good indicator of, whether or not your users will recommend your product to others. As you can see here, it is a survey and it is somewhat useful in kind of understanding whether or not accounts will stick around, but there are some problems with it. It does track how users feel, and it is a little bit qualitative, right? It essentially asks how whether or not a user would recommend a product to another user. And it is a lagging indicator, right? One thing we kind of realized is that even though it does give us some directionality around whether or not an account is going to churn or not, or if our users are happy with the product, we did find in quite a few situations that it really just wasn't enough. What we realized is that we kind of needed to enhance or kind of think about how our users actually use our product in a little bit different way. So we needed a metric that was really all about engagement. So how much are people actually using the product? Wanted something that was, again, a little bit more quantitative and also is more of a leading indicator rather than a lagging one. So that's why we created the product engagement score. Product engagement score is really all about as engagement, as it says in the name. If the hypothesis here is that if your users are really using your product and if they're increasing their usage of the product, chances are they're going to stick around, and chances are that that they are enjoying their experience. All right, so now that we've kind of talked about PES a little bit, I want to spend a minute to talk about what does a PES score actually mean. So a good high PES score is something above 60. It means that people are happy with your product, they're sticking around, they're using your product on a pretty regular basis, and product usage is growing. Medium is 30 to 60. it's good, but it does indicate that some of your users are going to churn. It's about 1.9x higher churn rate than a high PES score. And then low PS, which is less than 30, is a 2.5 higher churn rate. We have run a few studies, seen a few examples where there is a correlation between PES and customers' likelihood to churn. All right, so let's talk about what we've done with PES so far. So we launched PES about, I want to say about a year and a half ago. And throughout that time, we've made a few additions to it, as you can see here from our PES journey. We continue to be committed to PES. So we've released things like PES drill downs, allow people to get a little bit more information from the PES score. Add a few features in the app, so counts filter, pages as core events, trending PES, so you can see how much your PES score is increasing or unfortunately decreasing from month to month. And then about about 6 months ago now, we made some changes to the way PES scores were calculated, pretty much as a direct response to customer feedback so far. And now, without further ado, I'd like to talk about our latest addition, which is the PES API. So one of the kind of key pieces of feedback that we received from customers over the course of the past, I don't know, about a year or so now, is that PES is a great metric and it's really useful in helping to understand how customers are engaging with the product. However, it was a little bit limiting to only have it available within Pendo. So an example of this was a team that we recently spoke to, I guess about 6 months ago, who wanted to be able to kind of enable their customer success team to use PES as an indicator of customer health. Right. The problem is that the customer success folks didn't want to have another tool that they'd have to log into in order to understand the health of their customers. What they wanted to do was export PES scores out into the products that the reps used on a sort of a daily basis. So in other words, bring PES into, where the customer success reps are. So what we did in response to that was build this PES API. I want to talk about a couple of the possibilities that we've enabled here. So there is that customer success use case. It's now possible to use the PES API to pull PES score out of Pendo on an account by account basis so that your reps can understand how healthy a given customer relationship is. It's also possible to kind of export PES score into tools like Power BI and other business intelligence platforms. As I'm sure most of you are aware, businesses typically run on certain metrics like revenue, return, things of that nature. They don't really have a great metric to understand, or a great top level metric to understand product engagement. Well, now it's possible to export the product engagement score metric out and put it into those business intelligence dashboards. And then last up is kind of something that we've seen a lot of interest from and have actually made use of here at Pendo, is exporting PES data out into data science tools to even further understand customer churn and retention patterns. All right. So this functionality is currently live. It's totally available. As long as you have an API key, you can use this today. It's part of our aggregations v1 APIs, and the documentation is available at our newly built Engage API web API portal. All right, and I think that covers it for today.
Thank you so much, Derek. There is
absolutely.
one question. There is one question in the chat. Are there plans to allow different PS core events for different segments?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've heard that one quite a bit, as it turns out. There's nothing on the roadmap right now, but it's something that we're actively thinking about, kind of as maybe a next step.
Okay, great. Yeah, it seems to be a lot of people like that.
The proof's in the pudding.
Yeah, and then Eric Miller asked, in terms of segmenting PES, how scalable is PES? In other words, is there a certain account size or usage volume under which the components of PES might lose validity?
You know, that's a good question. So far, we haven't seen any of those situations. However, you know, I'd be more than happy to maybe look into it a little bit further and get you an answer after the fact.
Great. And then I think one more just came in. What is the best way to validate that our PS scores or predators are churn/account health? Would want to be sure of this before importing into Salesforce, etc.
Sure. So we have a few, we do have a few white papers of examples where customers have kind of used and kind of validated the PES score. One thing you could probably do is just look at the set of customers that you have that have churned and look at what their PES score was. That would help you kind of understand whether if the PES score was about a valid indicator of whether if those customers were going to churn.
Awesome. If you have just one more minute, I'll answer a few more, and then if there's some more that pop up, I'll let you answer them in the chat.
Yeah, for sure.
The next one is in a multi-app situation, can PES be used per app instead of as a whole for the Pendo subscription?
Yes, it can. So it is possible to specify the app as well as the subscription, or it is possible to specify the subscription when pulling from the PES API.
Okay, great. And then last question for you. Similar, are there plans to drill into PES at the page level?
No plans at the moment, but it is one of those things that we have heard some feedback on.
Okay, great. I'm going to move forward, and Derek, if you don't mind, if there's some more questions in the chat, just I'll make sure to direct them your way. Right now, I'm going to pass it off to Julie and Jesse from Direct Supply. Derek, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll have Julie and Jesse take over and share theirs.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm sharing my screen. As Dylan mentioned, both Jesse and I are from Direct Supply, and we'll be sharing our journey with Pendo from the side of learning experience designers. So our mission at Direct Supply, you can see on the screen, is a lot of text. If I could sum it up in just giving you a statistic about Direct Supply, in the last year, more than 85% of senior living providers, including nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and memory care communities, have made a purchase either from Direct Supply or one of our platform solutions. One of those platform solutions happens to be one of our lines of business, which is DSSI. So you can see here, it's considered our senior living's e-procurement solution. So what we are able to do with DSSI is we link healthcare companies to their supply chain, and then we're able to provide cost savings. We can provide supply chain optimization, contract compliance, all sorts of really great things. And we've been doing this for over 20 years for this line of business. DSSI, as it says, is an e-procurement solution. So it was the first way in which we started utilizing Pendo. What I will cover is our history. So when we were first asked to present at today's Pendorama, our CSM at the time, Brent, who's great, had asked us to really just share our journey with Pendo, and it goes back a little ways. So back in August of 2016, we started to develop our business case for a third-party help solution. We did a lot of research, we vetted solutions, we finally landed on Pendo. We worked with engineering to get that Pendo snippet on the DSSI platform. And then in March of 2017, we launched our very first guide, which happened to be a tour for first-time users. Even ended with a little question at the end, a little poll that said, was this helpful? Yes or no, kind of giving authority to the fact that, yes, we need to move along with adding more help content. So that was good news. So in April of 2017, then we added a resource center with lots of resources, mostly one-page, like quick reference guides. A few months later, we implemented a post-purchase survey. We ended up implementing something called an SEQ, single ease question, since our users are coming onto the platform because their corporations have signed with us. They're not necessarily recommending like an NPS would. So we started with a single ease question, like how easy was this platform to use? We realized pretty early on that we weren't getting the type of data that we wanted. So in October 2017, we did switch to actually utilizing Pendo's NPS. So we continued to make that post-purchase, and then we use some of the capabilities that Pendo has within NPS to make sure that users aren't receiving that all the time. We can stagger that a little bit. In February of 2018, we started adding the Pendo snippet to more of our products, what we internally call our applications. We'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the upcoming slides, but that was pretty big news. In June of 2018, this was a really big milestone. We published our upcoming training sessions. So we do customized training sessions for new customers coming on board to our e-procurement platform. And post go live, so after they've onboarded to our system, we really expect the organizations to do their own training. And what we were finding over the years is that we were receiving a lot of ad hoc one-off requests. So at the same time, in June of 2018, we launched bi-monthly training sessions that were open to any of our customers. And not only did we offer those up and send invites to our internal teams to send to customers, but we also served up that information directly to customers using Pendo. So we had those light boxes popping up so customers were aware of an upcoming training opportunity. And then it even gave them a save to calendar option where they could get that added to their calendar. In January of 2020, we started using polls. We worked with our product team to start evaluating new features and new workflows. And then they were looking at that feedback from the polls and making informed decisions about how to progress next. March 2020, this was another big one. You can all remember back to March 2020, right? Start of COVID. Two things happened at that point. One, not listed here, we did take down those upcoming training messages to users. We recognized, users just needed to get in, they need to order that PPE, their supplies, their food, get that to their the residents in their buildings. We didn't need to, I guess, add some noise to their workflow. So we did take those down for a period of time. We also at the same time launched announcements through the Resource Center. This was really big because at the time we had some engineering releases that were really important to our customers. Things like being able to tell customers when their orders had canceled line items or back ordered line items, not available line items. So we were able to let users know about that addition, and it just tied in really nicely with what was happening out in the world at that time. Next, in November of 2021, we revamped the Resource Center. We'll talk a little bit more about that on an upcoming slide. And then most recently, we relaunched an NPS post-purchase survey. So somewhere along the line, we had stopped utilizing NPS, mainly because we just weren't doing much with the data. And I don't like asking for feedback if we're not going to do something with that feedback. So we kind of redesigned how we were going to look at that. We established some processes, have people looking at this, and decided to launch just a 5-star kind of poll instead of the actual NPS, because that aligns with other lines of business work that we're doing where we are evaluating and asking for that feedback. So that's our journey. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in February of 2018, we started adding Pendo to more products, or what we internally call applications. So again, we started with DSSI, but then we have all these other applications, or again, products. So we work with engineering to first have them get the Pendo snippet added to each one of those applications. But then we also started segmenting that based on that. So we had the Pendo snippet added, and then we had our engineering team create a piece of metadata that we were sending, or still are sending, to Pendo. We call that application equals. And so we can segment our guides and specifically our resource center content based on each one of these. So some of you use the multi-app with Pendo. We just have the DSSI app, but then within DSSI, we are able to segment to all of these different areas, which is really nice for us. All right, resource center content. So I mentioned earlier that towards the end of last year, we did redo how our resource center kind of looks and feels. I'll share a little bit more about that now. First, we made several iterations along the way. If you think all the way back to April 2017, when we first launched our resource center, I did make several changes along the way, but the most significant one happened in November of 2021. A couple of things happened. One, Brent, my CSM, had been asking me why I was still using the classic designer. So finally started using that visual design studio, made him happy, but also recognized that we wanted two more things. One, searchable content. So we wanted users to be able to find content, but I also wanted to make sure that users didn't have to scroll through a lot of content within the resource center. So before, we had it broken out by topics, or what you could call categories and subcategories. I wanted just one place, and I wanted one area for them to look at. So you can see there's a scroll bar. There's only one additional section, and only certain users have access to that section. So at a quick glance, they can easily see what's available to them. They have an onboarding section, which I'll talk about. If they have access to some of our Zendesk tools where they can submit tickets, they'll be able to do that from the help menu area. This is that upcoming training that I mentioned where we were populating messages to users 48 hours in advance, but we also have those listed on our help menu as well. So if users are onboarding new staff in their buildings, they could get that onto an onboarding calendar, for example. And then this resources area, which does allow for that searchable content, which some of you might have been doing for years, but we just started using the search feature more recently. And then just to give you an idea, these are a couple of our other resource centers, what we would call help menus. And again, we segment those based on the app or the product. So we're able to do that quite seamlessly. All right, in terms of that onboarding module, so if I go back up for just a moment, this onboard section is the same as a guide that looks like this. This guide populates automatically to first-time users. And they can either choose to take the tour or we snooze it. Now, pretty cool metric, I thought at least, is that at least 66% of our users either took the tour or at least wanted to be reminded of it later. So those are pretty decent odds. Once they select Take Tour, it actually launches them into that onboarding module, which is also, again, on the help menu. And we do use Pendo's onboarding module specifically, so then users can see what they have completed and what they haven't. As you can see, not all of these are just one-step guides. Some of them are, 5 or more steps. So it's actually quite a long tour. I'll be honest, I was really nervous about pulling these metrics before today's call, but I was actually pleasantly surprised. So this gives you an idea of the first 5 guides on the list. And until the 5th guide, we have 90% or more users who continue on within the tour, which I thought was really impressive. By the time we get to the 6th guide, obviously there's no continue option at that point, but more than half of users choose to take an additional step. So 53% are choosing to either watch the most recent training video or open up that user guide. So I thought that was good. All right. Switching gears a little bit, one of the ways that we started making Pendo part of the vernacular within DSSI is we started sharing more about Pendo all of the time. And one of the things that I would do is anytime I would do something new using Pendo on DSSI is I would communicate it to the business. So here's just an example of an email, and I'm going to walk through some of the key things that I would include in those emails. First of all, oops, I would make sure that it was sent to all partners. This is a distro list of over 200 people. So we can't say that, you know, they're not hearing things. We're at least sending that to them. Then I'm also tying that to something either that engineering did or that a customer asked for. So trying to really relate how training, that's the team that we're under, learning experience designers, how training and marketing is really interacting with engineering and the business. I then also included what actually is this thing. So not just like what did we add, but how does it function? So adding those details, especially for our customer facing partners, as they're getting questions from their customers, they need to be aware of how how each one of these works. All right, one of my favorite slides is product teams starting to use Pendo. Some of you are probably on product teams and you're managing Pendo. We're not. And so it was really exciting for us when we started having product teams actually using Pendo on their own. So along the way, part of our journey was really us reaching out to product, reaching out to engineering to see what new releases were happening, what was up and coming, really trying to pull from them. And it was really exciting when the product team started doing some of this on their own, started reaching out to us. Again, it was a bit of a journey. One thing that I can share is that one thing that really helped us is we have sprint reviews every other week with engineering and product. And I ended up scheduling after those meetings, a 15-minute call to connect with our product team and just say, you know, okay, based on what we learned today, what is customer facing? What needs to be communicated to customers? And if something needs to be communicated, then can we use Pendo for that? So that really started to help. So really just putting that on their calendars and making that part of the day. So here's an example why I was so excited. This particular slide actually appeared during one of those sprint reviews. I knew right away that it was from Pendo because I recognized this is from one of the widgets on the dashboard. And this was one of our product managers who on his own worked with his team to determine what is the goal, how are we going to measure success, went out, created that, worked with this particular customer, and then followed up and started to measure that success all the way. And he's one of those guys who was in there all the time, multiple times during the day, just to see how they were performing. So this one was really excited for us. All right, so now I'm going to transition out of DSSI into one of our other platform solutions, and that is called DSN. So as you can see, this is e-commerce. So DSSI was our e-procurement solution. DSN is our e-commerce solution for healthcare and senior living. We offer over, just to give you a stat, 1 million items to senior living. And some of those, we have exclusive brands as well on our side. DSN is just an internal term. Externally, it would be directsupply.com if you ever wanted to look at it. So our Pendo history is much shorter. In 2021, March of last year, we had the Pendo snippet added to DSN. And along the way, we added a couple guides, a couple of the product teams, product members would reach out and say, hey, I heard about Pendo, can we add this? Sure. Well, the most significant thing that we did was in May of this year, where we launched a resource center. And it was a little bit of a different use case than why we did it on DSSI. On DSSI, we wanted a help area where users could go if they had questions about how to use the system. This one, a product manager came to us and said, hey, I hear all this great stuff that you're doing on DSSI using Pendo. Can we talk about using Pendo in a specific way for your DSN? So we talked through that. His rationale or his use case was that on DSSI or on DSN, excuse me, this is a screenshot of directsupply.com. There is this resources area in the upper right corner, and customers aren't seeing that and they're not using it. So it's a really nice page. If I click into it, it does show me, all of this information. There's not searchable content though, and users do have to click to expand each one of these different sections in order to find their content. This is not help content on how to use a system. This is content about a specific product. So if they're ordering a bed, a mattress, a wheelchair, they want maybe additional product specs on how to service this particular product. That's what they're searching for. But what this particular product manager was recognizing is they're just not using this resources area. There are a lot of questions coming in via chat, via email, via phone calls. He wants to try and drive that down. So he wanted to use Pendo as a proof of concept. So what we did is we added an eye icon, again, Pendo's Resource Center, in the lower right corner, and we added the top 15 or 16 resources to this area. And now users can either, they're going to get the same content, whether it's resources or down here, but what this particular product manager is hoping for is that he can look at the metrics on his side and see that there is a decrease in the ticketing volume, decrease in the calls, and that sort of thing. So a couple different use cases for that resource center, but I'm a huge fan of getting information into the resource center and making that available to customers. All right, I'm now transitioning it over to Jessie, my counterpart. We'll talk about one of our other platform solutions. Really excited for her to share with you. She has a shorter, she has a shorter tenure with Direct Supply and has done just amazing things in that short tenure. So take it away, Jessie.
Thanks, Julie. So my name is Jessie Michelle, and I'm also a learning experience designer in different lines of business than the ones Julie's been speaking about. So where we really have DSSI showing you the resource center and DSN showing the resource center and how guide usage, what I want to talk about are maybe some features that you're maybe not using or underutilizing in Pendo to give you some kind of like new ideas about stuff you could do. So let's see if I can control Julie's screen here. She's sitting behind me, so if you heard her, that's can you go back one, Julie? Okay, cool. So my line of business, one of the ones that I support is TELS. So TELS is a web-based system for senior living building maintenance professionals. So they can help keep track of assets that they might have, pieces of equipment. They can manage work orders that might be coming in about their buildings and maintain documentation there as well. So through TELS, they have access to a system of vetted service providers who can help cover things like repairs, installations, capital projects and preventative maintenance when maybe they need a little bit of extra help at their buildings. So those service providers have access to the TELS, what we call TELS Connect side of TELS. And from there, they can accept those jobs, manage the jobs, as well as submit bids and facilitate communication between themselves and the senior living community. So that's kind of what TELS is the building management piece of Direct Supply. If you can go forward one, Julie. So we have two products over in TELS as well, and we have Pendo on both of these. So the first one is the TELS Connect. So the audience here is service providers. And then we also have TELS Platform, and the main audience here are our customers, so those building maintenance folks. So I'm going to talk you through our Pendo history, which is shorter than DSSI. So we implemented Pendo on TELS in around May of 2019. Pretty small. We were mostly using it for first time tours kind of thing and some simple guides. And then May of 2019 through about May of 2021 didn't really go that well. So no one was really managing this content. It was just kind of being put on the site without a lot of vetting. No one was really responsible for maintaining it. We did use some of the Pendo guides around the pandemic to populate some COVID-related messaging during this time, but generally it was kind of dying on the vine, so to speak, and it was also kind of undermining trust from our product managers around what Pendo could do. So there was definitely some like resentment building up because no one was really responsible for making sure that it went well. And then toot my own horn here, May of 2021, I joined Direct Supply and kind of took Pendo and was trained by Julie on how to use it. So we really tried to kind of get this up and running and try to utilize it for as many different things as we could. So the next thing, in July of that year, we started measuring guide effectiveness using conversion rates. So this was kind of a newer feature around this time, but this was the first time we really tried to measure whether a guide was effective at getting the behavior change from our customers that we were looking for. That same month, we A/B tested some messaging to help reduce service provider time to onboard. This was taking much longer than we wanted, so we had 2 different style guides. One was longer that had a lot of information on it, almost like a cover letter, and the other one was a tour style. So we A/B tested that and then also looked at the time to onboard for the service providers that saw those messages, compared them, and then figured out which one we were going to stick with. If you want to know, it was the tour style one had better results. Later that year, we published our first, what we call the digital post-it note. So this was our first internal use of Pendo. All the other ones had been customer facing, externally facing. So we found out that we had a particular team who was kind of their workflow, things needed to get sent to them for only certain corporations. And so partners had all these post-it notes around their desks that they were trying to make sure were up to date, so they would remember all of the corps that they needed to send on this other workflow. But it was changing weekly, so it was really, really hard to keep this up. So instead, we basically put a badge and a guide on that page in the flow of work that they could click on and have an updated list all the time of all the corps that they needed to remember to do this particular step for. They had been seeing compliance around 88%, couldn't really get it higher. And then once we published this, they've been basically at 100% compliance with this workflow just by adding that little kind of digital post-it note to the page. So that was a really cool use case. It was also around this time that I started presenting monthly at our sprint reviews as well. So where the engineers present their work, I present mine as well and show the line of business, what's happening in Pendo. So that's another way we try to communicate out what we're doing to the rest of the team. 2022, we concluded our first experiment, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. A couple months later, we worked with engineering to build a Pendo specific page element. So this is an invisible element on the page that engineering built specifically for workflow so that the Pendo message would appear only under certain conditions. So this was a really cool collaboration and really showed how far we'd come in about a year from basically having very little trust in Pendo from our teams to being able to collaborate really closely to build something specific for Pendo on our site. And then our newest innovation, I suppose. Oh, we have 2 more actually, I lied. So we created a dashboard for a specific campaign. So we had a feature release and had built some goals and some messaging around that and wanted to track it specifically. So this was the first dashboard that we created so that other stakeholders could come into Pendo and only see the information that they were looking for. Because we do have so much information in there, so much data, it can be really overwhelming if you only care about that one thing. So being able to put that dashboard together so partners could look specifically at what they cared about was a really useful tool for us as well. And then finally, launched a poll to gather real-time partner data. So this is another internal use case with that same team that wanted a little bit more information about one of their workflows. So we added a poll so that while partners were doing some steps, they could just do this one extra step and we could get that data right in the moment from them. Okay, so I'm going to go back and talk about conversion rates and how we use those to measure guide effectiveness. Can you go forward, Julie? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we had a initiative where we were launching Zendesk Help Center for some of our users. So we needed them to update their email address for this new launch. We wanted them to do it as much as they could. They're not required to enter an email address when they create an account. So we had kind of a few buckets of users that we wanted to target with slightly different messaging. So we had one bucket of users that did have an email address on file. We wanted them to go into their account settings page and review that information, make sure it was accurate. We had another group that had duplicative email addresses with somebody else. So they need to go in and like figure out whose was who and then put in a new one. And then we had another group of users who didn't have an email address in there at all. So by pulling those lists, which we did through a CSV, putting those into segments, slightly different messaging, bada bing, here we have conversion rates. So out of the about 9,000 users that saw that, we did have a pretty successful conversion rate of people going into their account settings page after they saw this guide. So we really did want to measure this specific action because some people were going to make an update and some wouldn't. So really the viewing of that page was the action that we wanted them to take. And when we look at that collectively, we weren't really sure what we were going to see. Were we going to see like 2% of people doing this or like 50? We really had no idea. We'd never really tried to measure this before. So this was a really great benchmark of what we could kind of expect from an effective guide in terms of driving that behavior that we wanted. And even now, about a year-ish later, we're still seeing this to be a pretty like good benchmark. We usually see about a 25 to 33% conversion rate on stuff. So we know that's kind of a typical conversion for us in terms of guide effectiveness, but this was really the first time that we tried to measure that and see if we were driving the behavior that we wanted with Pendo. So to kind of take that a step further, I want to talk about experiments, which can be kind of scary if you're not used to doing them. So I'm going to break it down for you here. It's really just taking the conversion rates and applying it a little bit more scientifically, quote unquote. So you're going to have your experiment group who's going to see the guide and a control group who's not. So Pendo does have an experiments functionality, but you don't need that in order to have an experiment in Pendo. You can do it manually and get the same results. The same process here is going to apply. It's just kind of how you set it up is a little bit different. So even if you don't have Pendo experiments, you can still do this. So this is really thinking about what is the action that you want people, your users, to take, and then figuring out what your hypothesis and success and failure criteria are. So this is a step that a lot of people, I won't really say skip, but maybe don't write down anywhere, where you might have an idea about what you're trying to test and what success and failure might look like for you. But I would encourage you to really write these down because this adds validity to what you're doing and the work that you're doing, because then you compare it to your end result and you can see, this was my hypothesis, this is what I tested. And it can be really simple, like maybe success is just people who saw the guide did X behavior at a higher rate than people who didn't. Like it can be really simple, but knowing for sure what you're looking for so that you can see whether the user action happened and that you're measuring it and was it successful in the end. So then step 2 is you want to segment your users. So you can do that dynamically through a Pendo segment, and one of the experiments I'm going to talk about, we did it that way, or you can do it statically, pulling a CSV and uploading that to a segment. One of the experiments we did this way, but just segment your users. And then step 3 is drafting that message. Try to get buy-in from as many stakeholders as makes sense for your use case. Because again, to what I talked about earlier, is by kind of going rogue and not showing anyone anything, we like undermined trust in the product and the work. So by making sure that you have buy-in around what this message is and what the experiment structure is, that can help you kind of prove out that it was successful or not. So then step 4, you're going to set that up in Pendo. So if you're using the experiments functionality, it's super simple. The experiment and control group, which are typically 50-50, are automatically assigned. If you're manually setting up, you can do that with A/B test groups using segments. And there's a really great Help Center article on Pendo about how to do that. So you can do it manually or with the functionality, but you're going to want to set that up. We typically run an experiment 30 or 60 days, depending on your use case. And then you're going to run it. And then when you're ready to conclude, your final thing is going to summarize your recommendations and learning based on the experiment and then share that out. So Julie showed some examples of what that might look like for her earlier. We also do the emails, we do sprint reviews, but figure out how you're going to share this with the people who may have helped you or might be interested in the results that you're doing. And I just want to talk about bias against failure here for a second, because I think when we try something and it doesn't work, we don't like to tell people about it. But we learn a lot from when things fail. So if something didn't work and you don't tell anyone, then you run the risk of doing that same thing over and over again and no one ever knowing. So the more you can share about even things that don't go well, you can learn from that and then not make that same, not really a mistake. You don't run that same thing twice, you try something else. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my first experiment, which was on Tells Connect. So that was our service provider side of things. So we were having this issue where service providers were declining a lot of jobs. And we didn't want them to do that. We wanted them to take the jobs and do the work. So we thought maybe if we could populate a message that emphasized the value of the work that they provide to senior residents, that would result in fewer declined jobs. We set this up using an experiment. This was our dynamic list. So we polled users based on the number of times they had clicked our decline button, and then used that as our segment for experiment and control. Ran it for about 60 days. And because I practice what I preach, we did not succeed. This was a failure. When we looked at our results, people who saw the guide were actually more likely to decline a job by a really small percentage. So to me, 7% is like whatever, like really the guide had no influence on their behavior at all. And these are like not great conversions if you look below. So this didn't work. So what can we learn from that? There could be a few things going on here. We ran this over the holidays, which may have been a mistake. During that time was also another big COVID surge. And because we work with senior living, a lot of those communities have really strict vaccination rules. So depending on that, we may have been out some more service providers, and so they may not have been able to accept it. Or, which I probably find more likely, is that they had already decided against taking a job before they ever got into the system. So by the time they got there and they saw another annoying pop-up, they declined anyway, and it didn't matter to them. So regardless, we know that this is not a way to get them to take more jobs. So we need to be using those learnings and moving on with another experiment. Another thing to point out here that's kind of really small, but if you look at the little blue button on that guide, it says remind me how to accept jobs. We kind of had like another mini hypothesis where it was like, oh, maybe they just don't remember how to accept a job. Like one person clicked that button during 60 days. So another thing that we learned is they do know how to accept a job. That's not the problem. So we can move on to other kinds of solutions to address decline rates. Okay, so second experiment on TEL's platform. So our customer building maintenance side of things. So this one, we thought if we could populate a message that emphasized benefits of ordering services, that would lead to an increase in requests from users who had only ordered 0 to 2 times in the last year. So our segment here was really specific. This is where we pulled the CSV and uploaded that as a segment. So these are not typical users. They're not typically ordering this from us. So we thought, hey, can we basically remind them about this functionality and see if we can get them to order more services. So this one did succeed by quite a bit, actually. So this one was actually quite effective at doing what we wanted it to do. So people who saw this guide were 51% more likely to click on the purchase service button. So not just going in and looking, they actually bought it. So that's good. It's really, really high. And then if we look at the data below that, we can see that these aren't very different numbers. So we have 172 converted, 145 out of the control group converted. It's still significant. We can still be really confident that the guide is what's driving this behavior. However, it looks kind of small until you think that each of those tickets equal money, right? So like if you look at how many users converted who saw the guide versus who didn't, that directly ties to revenue for the company. And all we did was populate a guide and run an experiment. So we learned here that we can influence people who didn't typically buy from us to buy from us in this way using a guide like this. So this was a successful one, but as I said, we want to share both our failures and our successes because we can learn from both of them. So to kind of wrap up here, what is next for Direct Supply and Pendo? So we're really focusing on how we can use Pendo to answer questions about our customers. That's really what you've kind of heard this whole time as we're redoing the resource center to be more user-friendly, as we're thinking through how can we reduce tickets internally, are we thinking how we can influence behavior of our customers, we're really thinking how do they consume content, where do they get stuck, and how do we drive the behavior that we're looking for. We're also looking to add more guide conversions and experiments. So every time I do a guide, I really try to think about what action am I trying to drive that I can measure. The conversion rate is so easy to set up and so easy to check, and it really quantifies if the thing that you're doing is having the effect that you want. So the more you can do that, the better. Transforming resource centers into more consumable content. What do people want? Do they want videos, PDFs? Do they want tour style guides? Do they want single page guides? Like when we start figuring this out, we can transform that help center content into content that they want to consume and implement it in more places to address more use cases. make more and better decisions based on metrics. So what are people doing and how are they acting? And how can we influence behavior around that, as well as sharing out with other people around the company what those look like. Continue to empower other users to utilize Pendo. So dashboards are huge here. Julie showed this as well. People who are going in of their own accord and finding this data and using it to make decisions. Sharing dashboards tied to specific campaigns has been really useful in my particular case, and sharing that with relevant stakeholders, because they know they are going in and checking and looking at what they can learn from that information. And all we have to do is set them up with those dashboards, and then they're good to go. And then finally, sharing best practices across our lines of business. Julie and I work in very different lines of businesses. They're doing different things, but we've tried to align on what these guides look like, feel like, what our best practices are, so that a customer in one line of business or another, they're having a similar experience in terms of what Pendo can do and what we're doing with it for direct supply. So with that, I'll take questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Jesse and Julie. That was great. So far, there are no questions. Wait, there is one question. Okay, from Kevin. How does your team organize your pages and products in Pendo? We'll happily take tips on naming conventions and organization to make things easy to find and work with.
That's such a great question. I think that's something we've kind of each have our own ideas about. With our various apps that we have all in one, I think it's really important to try and organize those as much as possible. So when I have a guide or like a feature or a page, I try to put the app that it is in up front, because our users don't typically look at one or the other. They're typically in just one. So having that at least as a searchable term, like, really narrows things down. But I think that's still an area like I'm at least really growing in, is those naming conventions and how to use the product areas also. I've tried to segment by app, but Julie's been doing this longer, so if she has any good advice.
Let's see, in terms of how we organize it, I did put together kind of like a one-pager for other coworkers who are in there as well. So we mentioned the product team, we have some other engineering folks, we have some UX folks who pop in there. So I did put together kind of a one-pager of best practices of how to name things, but we do also do that, the naming conventions based on the app or the product. Then we also have some other kind of, I guess, best practices, like we're gonna call the thing what it actually is, and then we're going to also put what type of thing is out there. So if it says, like we have a previously purchased filter, so we would say previously purchased, and then we would make sure it says filter rather than button or link. And then what I started to do, actually based on something Jesse was doing, is I started to include the type of guide in, I suppose you're asking products and features and pages, but on the guides themselves, I'm including in parentheses the type of guide that it is. Either it's a tour, it's on the resource center, whatever that is, just so again, that's searchable. So that makes it easier for us. But with pages and features, yes, I did create kind of a one-pager just to make sure that everyone is kind of following suit and naming things the same way, and things aren't getting, I guess, tagged multiple times either.
That sounds great. Thank you. We have time for one more question from Stephanie. Thanks for sharing. My question is around governance. Do you have an intake process for receiving requests for guides? Do you have power users for creating guides? Or do you open it up to PMs to create as well?
So right now, the way we have it is Jesse and I are the only ones for our areas who have that full access and are creating all of the guides. That might change in the future, especially as we continue to use Pendo more and more. But what we do in our DSSI line of business and DSN, I think Jesse does something similar, is when I meet with product, I'll ask them to give me like a short little blurb. Typically what we find is that they're more verbose in the information that they provide, which I actually prefer. I get to know a little bit more about the feature, the workflow. Then I'll go in and I'll utilize that thing look at what they wrote down, I'll pare it down a little bit, and then I send it to our marketing team as like a final pair of eyes to make sure that what we're putting out there kind of is in speaking our same language on the site, if you will. So while we're the only ones who create, there is kind of a pre-step and post-step as well. Jesse, anything else to add there?
No, we do something very similar. If I have kind of a request where someone's asking for something new that we've never done before and isn't tied to like a feature release and isn't strictly training, I usually try to put it back on them to get the correct permissions and make sure they're kind of checking all their boxes. And then I'll usually follow up at the end and make sure to like, did you check everybody? Like, are we good to go? And then always staging on QA and sending those drafts to everyone before anything goes live.
That sounds great. Thank you both so much. That was very helpful. And before we close out today, I have a few other things to announce. If you have not heard, we have Pendorama 2022 that is live right now. I will put the link in the chat for you all. This is our large conference in September 12th through the 14th in Raleigh. Registration is now open. You can expect inspiring keynotes, breakout sessions, think festival style food and music, and full day workshops and outdoor parties under the Raleigh stars. So just be on the lookout for that. The next thing I wanted to announce is also at Pendorama, you're welcome to, do you want to speak at it? Now you have the option to apply to speak at Pendorama, share your story with an engaged audience on innovative ways that you have used Pendo. And also we have our Pendo customer awards up that we will be giving out as well. If you want to submit for an award of any of the following categories listed here, please fill out the submission form. And we would love to make you proud of the work that you did with Pendo over the last year. The next thing I just wanted to get out is just making sure that you're utilizing all of Pendo. There's additional Pendo products and services that can help you meet your new goals and get more value. Pendo for mobile, Pendo for feedback integrations, multi-app professional services. So if you're interested in learning more, please reach out to your CSM, and then you can check out our follow-up email for more information. Also, just a quick plug, Pendo user groups bringing together customers from across the city to talk all things Pendo, and they're now virtual. This is a way for you to get to network, discuss best practices, and learn from other Pendo users in your area. If you are interested in being a leader, please let me know, and you can email that email down there at the bottom. Just a heads up, refer a print program. If you refer your connection to Pendo and earn up to $550, you get a free Pendorama ticket if your referral takes a meeting with us. So just make sure you take use of this opportunity. And now my final thing is Mind the Product. Pendo customers now receive 50% off at Mind the Product membership with the code Pendo50. Okay, I want to thank you all today for coming. Thank you all to all the presenters, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.